As has been mentioned before, I've spent my entire life working as what is now known as an enemy of the people. I am a journalist. And I want to tell you a story in the theme of saving us from ourselves as to one of the ways in which people who practice the craft to which I've devoted my life, telling stories, telling factual stories that need to be told, can do something small, useful, but indispensable to save us from ourselves. And that involves tracking the work of and holding accountable the government agencies that are supposed to do that work, but so often, so lamentably don't. So this is a story in which I play a very, very small role. It consists of writing 5 letters on a Post-it note. The hero of this story is a young reporter named Katie Colinari. She was someone I hired to work at WHYY when I was running the newsroom there. She's still there. She's very high up at WHYY now. But at the point in time of this story, about 6 years ago, she was a very new, very raw, and very scared cub reporter. Katie is the daughter of an opera conductor and a Lutheran minister. I say that because she is truly the daughter of an opera conductor and a Lutheran minister. She's an extremely theatrical, emotional person who has a tremendous moral passion. Her 2 parents came together to make one fine journalist. And Katie joined us as a temporary fill-in for another reporter, whom some of you may know, named Susan Phillips. Susan was the reporter who founded the project at our radio station called State Impact PA. And State Impact PA's main goal was to track the story of fracking in Pennsylvania. And Susan did that with furious energy for a couple of years, did it so well that she won the highest honor available to a public radio reporter, what's known as the Columbia DuPont Award. And as one of her rewards for that great work, she got a fellowship to go spend a year at MIT. So I had to replace Susan, and the replacement was Katie Colinari, who walked in scared, in awe of what she was supposed to do, wondering how in the world she was going to follow in Susan's footsteps. And one day, Katie came to me and said, she picked up the phone. Somebody had called that extension, which used to be Susan Phillips. She picked up the phone, and she'd heard this story from someone who was an employee at the State Department of Health. And they were calling to blow the whistle on the State Department of Health. Now, one of the misconceptions about whistleblowers is that they are malcontents or rebels. Most whistleblowers are actually people with a deep and abiding belief in the mission of the organization they work for. And what has driven them to pick up the phone and call a reporter or call a U.S. prosecutor is that they feel that the mission of their organization to which they've devoted their life is being betrayed. And this was the case here. This was in the early part of this decade, and Tom Corbett had just been elected governor of Pennsylvania, and he had come in on kind of a pro-energy, pro-fracking platform, and he was transforming what was happening in the agencies. One of those agencies was the Department of Health, and here's what had happened, and here's what the whistleblower had told Katie. That in every Department of Health center all over the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, there was now a list of words that was posted in essentially in every cubicle. And the words included fracking, methane, drilling, pollution, aroma, and on and on. It was a list of about 25 words. And the directive to everyone who worked in a health center in Pennsylvania was if anybody called up with a complaint or a report or a question and used any one of those words, the person at the desk in the health center was to immediately transfer them to a line that rang in Harrisburg. A line that rang in Harrisburg and was never answered. It went to a voicemail where people left a message, and that message might as well have gone into the black hole that we just saw the picture of for the first time a couple of weeks ago. So essentially, all reports about any health concerns that had to do with hydrofracturing or fracturing, the drilling for natural gas in Pennsylvania, essentially went to a voicemail that nobody ever answered. That was the one report. She got a call from another whistleblower a couple days later. It was that the people at the Department of Health now had to get permission to go to any conference where the same list of words were expected to be mentioned. Now, of course, people who work in state agencies regularly go to conferences to meet with experts and scientists working in their fields so they can deepen their relationships with people, know what are going on, or doing the research that helps them do their jobs. They had to get permission to go to any conference where anybody who knew anything about the health issues related to fracturing or natural gas drilling were going to be there. So essentially that meant they didn't get to go to any conferences, and they had this list of magic words that sent the complaint directly into the black hole of Harrisburg. There was one problem with this story. Like many whistleblowers, the whistleblower didn't want to go on the record and didn't want their name used, and they certainly didn't want to go on tape. Now, we're a public radio station. We live with people's voices on, I'm saying on tape, showing my age, recorded. And so Katie was honestly in a bit of a dither. She didn't know how to do the story. So we sat down and we talked about how to surround the story from different levels. Can we find some people who've made those complaints? Can we find some people who used to work at the Department of Health and can tell us how this kind of thing was happened? Can we talk to the former head of the Department of Health? There's all kinds of things you can do as a reporter to surround a story, even when the central source doesn't want to be named. The other thing is you constantly talk to that source and constantly try to persuade them that the story will be so much better if they go on the record. So Katie worked and worked and worked and did all those things like the great reporter that she is. And she had a mound of data that she wanted to share with the public, except for one problem. It was a mound of data and reporting, and she had never done a story this big in her life. So she came into my office one day and we were talking about the story, and she's gonna hate me for telling people this, but she basically broke down crying in my office, tears of frustration that she just couldn't get her mind around it. And then even more tears because she was so angry that she was living the cliche of the young female reporter who cried in her boss's office. And so I basically said, don't worry about that. I don't care about that. Let's talk about the story. We talked a little bit more, and then finally I did the only useful thing I did in all this story. I got out a Post-it note and I wrote on it the letters JWTFT. This is the oldest trick in the editor's book. It's what I've used for my entire career, and I handed it to her. And she said, what does JWTFT mean? And I told her, just write the fucking thing. And so she did. And I told her the only way we can find out what the statue is inside this huge slab of marble that you've collected is for you to try. And so she tried, and her first draft was nearly magnificent. And we sat down and we worked it a bit, and then it was magnificent. And the stories ran, two stories, one about the list of magic words that sent every complaint and question about fracking into the black hole. The other one about the frustrations of all the people who couldn't ever go to a conference where they could learn more about their jobs and what they were supposed to do. The stories came out. Katie won a ton of awards for her about that, which really doesn't matter. What matters is it got the attention of people in Harrisburg, and it got the attention of a guy with a beard and a Jeep who was running for governor of Pennsylvania. His name was Tom Wolfe. And when he was elected governor of Pennsylvania, went into office, you know what was one of the first things he did? He got rid of the rule about the magic list of words that sent the complaints into the black hole, and he said members of the Department of Health could begin going to conferences where they could learn better how to do their jobs. So that's a small thing, but it's something that journalism does to help us save ourselves from ourselves.